Have you ever felt tired? Not because life was hard, but because you spent your whole life trying to prove that you were enough. This story is for the people who smiled while carrying pressure, who worked hard just to feel worthy, and who slowly forgot how to live peacefully. Tonight we stop proving, and we finally begin living. My name is Daniel. For most of my life, I believed that love had to be earned. Not freely given, not naturally received. Earned. I believed that if I worked harder, spoke better, achieved more, and disappointed fewer people, then maybe I would finally feel enough. But the strange thing was this: no matter how much I achieved, that feeling never stayed. It disappeared quickly, like rain drying in the sunlight. For years, I lived inside a quiet competition, not with other people, but with myself. Every morning, I woke up already feeling behind, already feeling pressure, already feeling the need to prove something. To my parents, to my coworkers, to society, to the world, and most painfully to myself. I didn't know when this habit began. Maybe when I was a child. Maybe when adults only smiled proudly when I got good grades. Maybe when I learned that success brought attention, but mistakes brought silence. As a child, I became careful, very careful. I learned how to read people's reactions. I learned how to avoid disappointing others. I learned how to become the version of myself that people accepted. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped asking one important question: what do I actually want? Instead, I only asked what will make people proud of me. That question shaped my entire life. When I entered university, I studied harder than everyone around me. Not because I loved studying, but because I was terrified of failure. Failure felt dangerous. Failure felt personal. Failure felt like proof that I was not worthy. So I kept going, even when I was exhausted, even when I couldn't sleep, even when my body begged for rest. And people admired me. You're so disciplined. You're so responsible. You always do your best. I smiled politely whenever they said those things. But inside, I felt tired, deeply tired. Because they only saw the results. They didn't see the fear behind them. After university, I found a stable office job. The kind of job that looked successful from the outside. Nice clothes, a modern building, a monthly salary, professional meetings. My parents were proud. My relatives complimented me. Friends said I was doing well. But every evening, when I returned home, I felt strangely empty. I often sat alone in my small apartment, staring at the ceiling in silence. Some nights, I asked myself quietly, why am I still unhappy? I had done everything correctly. I had followed the rules. I had worked hard. I had sacrificed comfort for success. So why did peace still feel far away? At work, I became known as someone reliable. Whenever there was pressure, my manager gave the task to me. Whenever someone made mistakes, I tried to fix them. Whenever deadlines became impossible, I stayed late. At first, I thought this meant I was important, needed, valuable. But over time, I realized something painful. The more I proved myself, the more people expected from me. And strangely, I also expected more from myself. Nothing was ever enough. If I succeeded, I immediately moved to the next goal. If I rested, I felt guilty. If someone criticized me, I remembered their words for weeks. I carried pressure everywhere. Even during weekends. Even during meals. Even while trying to sleep. My mind never truly rested. One evening, my friend Michael invited me to dinner. We had not met for several months. He looked at me carefully across the table. "You look tired," he said softly. "I'm okay," I replied automatically. But he continued looking at me. Not judgmentally. Just honestly. "You always say that," he said. I laughed quietly, but something inside me felt uncomfortable because he was right. I always said I was okay, even when I wasn't. Michael leaned back in his chair. Can I ask you something? Sure. Why do you push yourself so hard all the time? I opened my mouth to answer. But suddenly, I realized I didn't know. Or maybe I knew, but I was afraid to say it. So instead, I shrugged. That's just how life is. Michael shook his head slowly. No, he said. That's how your life has become. His words stayed with me long after dinner ended. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring into the darkness. And for the first time in years, I admitted something to myself. I was exhausted, not physically. Emotionally, I was tired of performing, tired of pretending, tired of constantly trying to prove that I deserved love, respect, and acceptance. But even after realizing this, I didn't know how to stop, because proving myself had become part of my identity. Without achievement, who was I? Without pressure, what would motivate me? Without external validation, would I still feel valuable? Those questions frightened me. So the next morning, I returned to work, smiled politely, answered emails, finished tasks, attended meetings, and continued carrying the invisible weight. Until one winter afternoon, everything changed. It was cold outside. The office windows were covered with pale gray clouds. Most people had already gone home, but I stayed behind to finish another project. My desk was filled with papers, coffee cups, notes, a laptop glowing under dim light. I had been working for nearly 12 hours. My shoulders hurt. My eyes burned. But still, I kept typing. Just finish this, I whispered to myself. Then you can rest. But deep inside, I already knew the truth. There was always another task, another goal, another expectation. Rest never truly arrived. Suddenly, my hands stopped moving. I stared at the computer screen, at the endless sentences, at the unfinished work, and something inside me quietly broke. Not dramatically, not loudly, just silently. A deep exhaustion spread through my chest. I looked at my reflection in the dark office window, and honestly, I didn't recognize myself anymore. The tired eyes, the tense shoulders, the constant anxiety, the person who no longer knew how to relax. A painful question came to mind. Who am I doing all this for? And suddenly, I couldn't answer. The silence in that office felt enormous. For years, I thought I was building a successful life. But maybe I was only building a prison made of expectations. And for the first time, I wondered what life would feel like if I stopped trying to prove myself. That night, I walked home slowly through the cold streets. The city lights looked distant and quiet. Cars moved past me. People hurried home. The world continued normally. But inside me, something had shifted. I could feel it. For years, I had ignored my inner voice. Whenever exhaustion appeared, I pushed harder. Whenever sadness appeared, I distracted myself. Whenever fear appeared, I buried it under productivity. But now, I could no longer ignore what I felt. When I arrived home, I didn't turn on the television. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't check my work messages. I simply sat near the window, watching the rain quietly fall outside. And for the first time in a very long time, I allowed myself to feel everything. The pressure, the loneliness, the fear, the exhaustion. Tears slowly filled my eyes, not because one terrible thing had happened, but because I had been emotionally tired for years. I realized something painful. I didn't know how to live peacefully. I only knew how to achieve. Even rest had become a goal. Even happiness felt like something I had to earn. That realization broke my heart. The next morning, I woke up feeling strangely calm, not happy, not healed, but honest. For the first time, I stopped pretending that everything was fine. At work, I noticed how tense my body always felt, how quickly my mind reacted to pressure, how deeply I feared making mistakes. Even small situations affected me. If someone answered my email coldly, I worried for hours. If my manager looked serious, I assumed I had disappointed him. If I couldn't complete something perfectly, I criticized myself immediately. It was exhausting. And suddenly, I understood something clearly. I had spent years living in survival mode, not because my life was dangerous, but because my mind believed my worth depended on performance. That week, I began doing something unusual. I started observing myself, not judging, not criticizing, just noticing. I noticed how often I apologized unnecessarily. I noticed how uncomfortable I felt while resting. I noticed how difficult it was for me to say no. One afternoon, my manager asked me to take responsibility for another project. Normally, I would have accepted immediately, even if I was overwhelmed. But this time, I hesitated. "I don't think I can handle another project properly right now," I said carefully. The words felt terrifying. For a moment, I expected disappointment, criticism, judgment. But instead, my manager simply nodded. "Okay," he replied. "We'll give it to someone else." That was all. The world did not collapse. Nobody became angry. Nobody rejected me. But inside me, it felt revolutionary. Because for years, I believed boundaries would make people love me less. That evening, I walked home feeling lighter. Not completely free, but different. As if I had finally opened a small window inside myself. Over the following weeks, I slowly began changing small habits. I stopped checking work emails late at night. I started taking walks without listening to podcasts or productivity videos. I ate meals more slowly. I allowed silence to exist. At first, it felt uncomfortable. My mind kept whispering, "You're wasting time. You should be doing more. You're falling behind." But another voice, quieter and gentler, began speaking too. "You're tired. You deserve rest. You do not need to earn peace." That gentle voice felt unfamiliar, but I continued listening. One Sunday morning, I visited my parents. My mother prepared tea while my father watched television quietly. As we sat together, my mother smiled proudly. "You work so hard," she said. "We always tell relatives how successful you are." Normally, those words would have made me feel proud. But this time, I felt sadness. Not because they were wrong, but because I suddenly realized how deeply I had connected love with achievement. Even as a child, I had believed that being impressive was the safest way to receive affection. And maybe my parents never intended to create that pressure. Maybe they simply wanted me to have a good future. But somewhere along the way, I stopped believing I was lovable without success. That realization stayed with me for days. One evening, I wrote in my journal, "What if my worth already exists? What if I do not need to prove it?" The sentence looked strange on paper, almost impossible. But something inside me wanted to believe it. A few weeks later, I met Michael again. This time, he immediately noticed the difference. "You seem calmer," he said. I smiled softly. "I'm trying to change." "How?" I thought carefully before answering. "I think I'm trying to stop fighting myself all the time." Michael nodded slowly. "That sounds peaceful." Peaceful. The word stayed in my mind. Peace. Not excitement, not achievement, not recognition. Peace. For years I had chased success, believing it would eventually bring peace. But now, I have begun to understand something important. Peace was not a reward waiting at the finish line. Peace was a way of living. And maybe, just maybe, I had been running past it my entire life. That realization changed everything. Slowly, I stopped measuring every moment by productivity. Some evenings, I simply sat near the window and watched the sunset. Some mornings, I drank coffee slowly without checking my phone. Some weekends, I rested without explaining myself. And although these moments seemed small, they healed something deep inside me. I also noticed changes in my relationships. I stopped trying to impress people constantly. I stopped explaining myself excessively. I stopped chasing approval from those who never truly understood me. And strangely, I felt freer. Not everyone liked the new version of me. Some people expected the old Daniel, the endlessly available Daniel, the overly responsible Daniel, the people-pleasing Daniel. But I could no longer abandon myself just to keep others comfortable. For the first time, I began respecting my own emotional limits. And that respect slowly became self-love, not dramatic self-love, not confident in speeches in front of mirrors, just gentle honesty, the kind that says, I am tired, I need rest, I deserve kindness too. One night, while walking home under soft streetlights, I suddenly realized something surprising. For the first time in years, my chest no longer felt heavy. The pressure was still there sometimes. The fear still returned occasionally. But it no longer controlled my entire life. Because now, I had begun choosing peace over proving. And slowly, that choice was changing me from the inside. As the months passed, my life became quieter. Not empty, not boring, just quieter inside. The constant noise in my mind slowly began disappearing. For years, my thoughts had sounded like endless pressure. Work harder. Do more. Be better. Don't disappoint anyone. But now, those thoughts appeared less often. And when they did, I no longer believed them immediately. Instead, I paused, breathed slowly, and asked myself, is this pressure truly necessary? Sometimes the answer was yes. Life still required responsibility. Deadlines still existed. Problems still happened. But many times, the pressure came from old fears, not reality. That realization changed the way I treated myself. Before, I spoke to myself harshly. If I made mistakes, I became angry. If I failed, I felt ashamed. If I rested, I called myself lazy. Now, I tried speaking to myself differently, more gently, more honestly. One afternoon, I made an important mistake during a work presentation. Several people noticed. The room became awkward. In the past, I would have replayed that moment for weeks. I would have punished myself emotionally. I would have obsessed over every detail. But this time, I simply took a breath, corrected the mistake, and continued. That evening, I still felt embarrassed, but I did not hate myself. And honestly, that felt like progress. I also began noticing how many people around me were exhausted too. Coworkers are constantly competing, friends pretending to be fine. People smile while secretly carrying emotional pain. It seemed like everyone was trying to prove something. Success, intelligence, strength, importance. And suddenly I understood something deeply. Many people are not living. They are performing. Performing successfully. Performing happiness. Performing confidence. Because they are afraid that without those performances, no one will choose them. That realization made me feel compassion, not judgment. I knew that fear well. I had lived inside it for years. One rainy evening, I visited a small bookstore near my apartment. I often went there after work because it felt peaceful. The owner, an older woman named Clara, always greeted customers warmly. That night, I found myself talking with her near the front desk. You seem calmer these days, she said unexpectedly. I smiled. Is it that obvious? A little, she replied gently. Your eyes look less tired. Her words touched me deeply. Because for years, I had carried invisible exhaustion everywhere. Clara handed me a small cup of tea. Can I tell you something? She asked. Of course. There comes a moment in life when people must decide whether they want peace or endless approval. I looked at her quietly. She continued, "The difficult part is this: peace is usually quieter. Approval is louder. So many people choose noise." I thought about her words for a long time. She was right. Approval feels exciting. It feels powerful. It feels temporarily comforting. But peace feels different. Peace is slower, softer, more stable. Peace does not shout. It simply stays. That night, while walking home through the rain, I realized how much my life had changed. Not externally. I still had the same apartment, the same job, the same responsibilities. But internally, everything felt different. I no longer woke up feeling desperate to prove myself. I no longer measured my worth through productivity alone. I no longer believed mistakes made me unlovable. And perhaps most importantly, I no longer abandoned myself just to gain approval. That change affected every area of my life. I became more present during conversations. Instead of trying to sound impressive, I simply listened. I became more honest about my emotions. Instead of pretending to be strong constantly, I admitted when I felt tired or uncertain. And surprisingly, people connected with me more deeply. Because honesty creates closeness. Performance creates distance. One weekend, I traveled alone to a small town outside the city. The town was quiet. There were mountains in the distance and narrow streets filled with trees. I spent most of the day walking slowly. No schedule, no goals, no pressure. At one point, I sat beside a river and watched sunlight move across the water. And suddenly, I felt something I had not experienced in years. Stillness. Not emptiness. Not boredom. Stillness. A calm feeling inside my chest. A feeling that said you do not need to become anyone else right now. Tears quietly filled my eyes again. But this time, there were no tears of exhaustion. There were tears of relief. Relief from years of internal pressure. Relief from endless comparison. Relief from constantly trying to earn worthiness. As I sat there, watching the river flow peacefully, I realized something profound. Life was never asking me to prove myself constantly. That pressure came from fear. Fear of rejection. Fear of failure. Fear of not being enough. But fear is not truth. And for the first time, I truly understood that. When I returned to the city, people around me noticed the difference more clearly. "You seem happier lately," one coworker said. "You smile more now," another friend told me. I didn't know exactly how to explain the change, because happiness was not the correct word. What I felt was deeper than happiness. I felt lighter, as if I had finally stopped carrying something heavy. Of course, I still had difficult days. Some mornings, old fears returned. Some situations still triggered anxiety. Healing was not perfect, not immediate. But now, I treat myself with patience instead of punishment, and that changed everything. Little by little, peace became my new foundation. Not perfection, not achievement, not external validation. Peace. Quiet, honest, gentle peace. And for the first time in my life, that felt enough. A year later, I hardly recognized the person I used to be. Not because my life had become extraordinary, but because I had changed internally. Before, I lived as if every moment were a test. Every conversation, every mistake, every achievement. I constantly worried about how people perceived me. Whether I was successful enough, intelligent enough, productive enough. Now, those questions mattered less. Not because I stopped caring completely, but because I finally understood something important. My worth could not be measured by endless performance. That understanding brought enormous freedom. One evening, I met Michael again at the same restaurant where we had spoken months earlier. He looked at me and smiled. "You look peaceful," he said. This time I believed him. As we talked, I realized how differently I now viewed life. Before, I believed strength meant pushing through exhaustion. Now, I believe strength means listening to myself honestly. Before, I believed success required constant sacrifice. Now, I believe success without peace was simply another form of suffering. Before, I believed rest had to be earned. Now, I understand rest was part of being human. Michael listened quietly. Then he asked, "What changed you the most?" I thought carefully before answering. Finally, I said softly, "I got tired of abandoning myself." The words surprised even me, but they were true. For years, I ignored my emotional needs, ignored my exhaustion, ignored my pain, all because I wanted approval. But eventually, that way of living became unbearable, and perhaps that is why change finally happened. Not because I suddenly became wise, not because life became easier, but because my soul became too tired to continue pretending. After dinner, I walked home slowly through the city. The night air felt cool and calm. As I passed crowded streets and bright buildings, I noticed something interesting. Everyone seemed in a hurry. Phones ringing, cars moving, people rushing. For a moment, I saw my old self inside that movement, always chasing, always proving, always afraid to stop. And quietly, I felt compassion for that version of myself. I no longer hated him. He was not weak. He was simply afraid. Afraid that without achievement, he would disappear. But now, I understand something he did not know. Human worth is not something we earn. It is something we already carry. That realization changed the way I treated not only myself, but also other people. I became less judgmental, less competitive, more patient. Because once you stop constantly proving yourself, you also stop needing others to prove themselves too. And that creates softness. A softness that allows relationships to breathe. Several months later, I received an offer for a higher position at work. In the past, I would have accepted immediately. The title, the salary, the recognition. But this time, I paused. I carefully considered the emotional cost, the longer hours, the increased pressure, the life I might lose while chasing another achievement. And after several days, I politely declined. Some people were shocked. "Why would you refuse such a good opportunity?" one coworker asked. I smiled gently. Because for the first time in my life, I was not making decisions based only on external success. I was also protecting my inner peace. And honestly, that felt like real maturity. That winter, I traveled again to the small town with the river. This time, I felt different while sitting beside the water. More grounded, more present, more alive. The river flowed quietly under pale sunlight. Trees moved gently in the wind. The world felt calm. And suddenly, I realized something beautiful. Peace had been available all along, but I had been too busy proving myself to notice it. I closed my eyes and breathed slowly. For years, I thought life was about becoming enough. Now, I understand life differently. Life was not asking me to constantly earn my value. Life was inviting me to experience it, to feel it, to live honestly inside it, without endless pressure, without constant comparison, without fear controlling every decision. As the wind touched my face, I smiled quietly. Not the smile of achievement, not the smile of victory, just the smile of someone finally at peace with himself. And in that quiet moment, I understood something I wish I had learned years earlier. Peace is not weakness. Peace is courage. Because choosing peace often means disappointing expectations. It means slowing down in a world obsessed with speed. It means valuing your inner life more than public approval. And that choice is not always easy. But it is worth everything. Today, I still work, still make mistakes, still have difficult days. I am not perfect, but I no longer spend my life trying to prove that I deserve to exist. Now, When pressure appears, I pause, I breathe, and I remind myself gently, you do not need to prove your worth to deserve peace. Those words have become my anchor, a quiet reminder that my value does not disappear during failure. That rest is not laziness. That softness is not weakness. That peace is not something I must earn after suffering. Peace is something I can choose now. And perhaps that has become the greatest transformation of my life. Because after years of chasing approval, I finally discovered something deeper. The moment I stopped trying to constantly prove myself was the moment I truly began living. And maybe that is the most important lesson of all. You do not have to exhaust yourself to deserve love. You do not have to achieve endlessly to deserve peace. And you do not have to spend your entire life proving that you are enough, because your worth was never something you needed to earn. Maybe the reason you feel so tired, it is not because you are weak. Maybe it is because you have been carrying invisible pressure for far too long. So tonight, before you sleep, take one deep breath and gently remind yourself, I am allowed to rest. I am allowed to slow down. I am allowed to exist without constantly proving myself. The world may continue rushing. People may continue competing. Pressure may still exist. But inside your heart, you can choose something different. You can choose peace. And sometimes, choosing peace is the bravest thing a person can do. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for listening. And if this story touched your heart, I hope it reminds you to be a little gentler with yourself tomorrow. Because you deserve a life that feels peaceful, not just successful.